Hi, this is Derek. Just checking in with everyone. Janine said you weren't getting audio, but it might have been because I was muted. So can you hear now? So just chat. Basically, there wasn't any audio to get because it was early. I think we unmuted Juice if you want to try to reply. Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Hey, this is Cece with ISE. Hey, Derek. I do have Janine and Michelle who have joined us so far.
Yeah, Janine was IMing that she doesn't have audio yet.
Okay. Sometimes the problem with folks who are on the computer only, so I'm going to send her a message to recommend joining by phone.
Okay. And we're just waiting for everyone to get on board. We're still about 3 minutes before start. I normally start about 1 minute late just because of differences in clocks. And sometimes if you don't plan ahead, you discover that you got a software download that you have to do. Particularly since I don't know about you guys, but I logged in this morning to discover my Internet Explorer was forcefully upgraded on me. So.
Oh, boy.
It's now Internet Explorer 10.
This is why I stick with Chrome.
They didn't ask. I just kind of came in and it did one of those Windows update things. And the next thing I knew. Here we go. Looks like Michelle called in.
We've got a few more people joining us. I know, Derek, you're going to talk about weather, particularly how it occurs in Ohio. How's the weather today?
Today's actually pretty nice. In fact, I kind of forgot how much I like snow. I've got so much snow this year. So it was a pretty brutal cold winter, so it's good that it's actually perking up a little bit.
Nice.
Good. Looks like everyone should have audio now. Now, we normally do mute people when they join. If you've been on these webinars before, you know there's normally a lot of background noise. We will maybe later on take it off depending on how things are going. But just so you know, if you're trying to talk to us and you're not hearing us respond, it's not that something's wrong. We just normally have things muted.
Although right now I've got everyone who's joined us unmuted. If you want to say hi, please do.
Hi, how are you?
Great. Is that Janine or Michelle?
This is Janine.
Great. Glad to know we've got you on audio.
Just to keep it on speaker.
When Derek gets started, I'll actually mute everyone just to make sure there isn't any background noise here. But at different points, we'll open it up for conversation as well.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. All right, well, I don't like to be too terribly late, so I'm going to get started. I see some of you already figured out the chat window. CC explained what we do during these calls is we normally mute everyone because we don't like there to be a lot of background noise. We've all been on calls where a dog starts barking or someone comes up and starts having a side conversation. Now, if you want to, at any point, you can ask a question with the chat feature. Now, I don't always see those right away, so CC kind of keeps an eye on them. She has seen this presentation, so if you're asking a question that she knows we're going to get to in 4 or 5 slides, she's probably not going to break in. But if it's a question that she knows I don't have built into the presentation already, she'll probably interrupt real quick and ask your question. So if you're shooting questions in and they're not being answered, know there's a good chance that's because CC's seen it and thinking, yep, good question, it's on slide 4. So, and if she does see something I need to get on, we'll jump right in. My name's Derek Christian. I'm the owner of My Maid Service. I am also the editor-in-chief of a new industry trade publication called Cleaning Business Today. And today we're talking about severe weather, but also just other forms of business disruption. And I kind of break this into, I say 3 at the top, but I broke it into 4. I broke one of them out, 4 types of service disruptions, of business interruptions. The first one is service failure. What I mean by that is phone and or power loss or other basic services like that. Another version of it would be a weather-related closure, which of course can result in phone and power loss, but also could mean your people can't drive, things like that. Localized disaster, and what I mean by localized disaster is something that probably only hit you. This could be a fire on your building, it could be theft, things like that. And then, of course, you have the big area-wide disasters, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, etc., things that affect the entire area. So we're going to run through these one by one and give you an idea of what we're talking about. For example, service failure. In 2008, my office is in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we're in the Ohio River Valley, and we got some windstorms that blew through as remnants of, I think, Hurricane Ike. Wind speeds hit up to 80 miles an hour, and here in Cincinnati, someone had the genius idea that all of our phone and power lines are above ground. So as the trees were getting blown over, places were losing business and phone service. Now, why this was particularly frustrating is because if you're in a valley, you weren't getting affected by any of this stuff. But if you were outside a valley, like I was, you got hit pretty hard. So this was a pretty big deal for us because we lost all of our phone, all of our internet, and all of our power on our main office for 4 days. But what was most frustrating about it is most of our clients were either not affected or they got power back within 24 hours. And this can be a bit of an interesting discussion to have with your client on why you can't take phone calls and why your office is down if they are not and the service failure doesn't affect them as well. So what you want to do on this type of thing is think through what you would want to do as a backup situation. If you lost phone and power to your office, but all your texts can work, you know, the roads are mostly clear, everything else is running, that's a scenario you've got to think through of what you would do. And I know what most people say is they would use their cell phones, but you also have to be careful with that because I can tell you from our experience in 2008, now admittedly this was 5 years ago, but the cell phone networks got massively overwhelmed, and about the only thing that was working was texting. And even that was working relatively slowly. So think about what happens if you get a service failure, what happens if a windstorm like that blows through and your techs can't reach the office. What is your procedure? Are they expected to come into the office? What office do they go to? You know, you need to have some policies, or when you can't get in contact with them, you're going to discover the hard way that if they can't reach you in the office, they're just assuming they weren't supposed to work that day. We were actually able to keep mostly in operation, partially because we had backup files, which we moved to another location, which did have computers and phones, and reestablished communication with everyone. But once again, that's something you would have to think through. If your office went down, could you pick up your computer, move to your house, and plug in at your house? Because service failures can be very, very localized. Sometimes it's just power, sometimes it's just phone, but here we had the joy that it was both. If anyone ever visits my office, there's a cord that runs from the two lines that run from the street to the house, and what happened is a tree fell over and took down our power line and our phone cord. And as you can imagine, when they're prioritizing these things, the cord that is physically in my front yard and only affects my business is very far down their priority list. So that's why we were one of the last ones to be brought back up. Also, another topic which we get in residential cleaning all the time is weather-related closures. And the most common one of these is, of course, going to be snow. When snow happens, a lot of times people have to shut their business down. Also, down in Texas, we get ice storms. Now, there's a couple different things to take into account on this. The first one is the legal restrictions. Most areas have some type of warning system, and I've been told these do vary by states, but in Ohio, we define it as level 1, level 2, and level 3 snow emergency. Level 1 is a warning. It basically says hazardous conditions, drive carefully. You know, at the end of the day, level 1, we work. Level 2 means only those people necessary to travel should be on the roads. Contact your employer to see if you should go to work. That's a little bit of a gray area for us, which we'll get into in a second. And level 3 means it's flat out illegal to be on the roads if you're not an emergency crew. So obviously, if it's a level 3 snow emergency, you need to shut the business down. It's illegal to operate at that point. And we've had that declared twice in the 6 years we've been in business in Cincinnati. Now, this can be difficult to explain to our clients with snow and ice. And one of the things that's very different about our business is the legal liabilities that we have when our people are out driving. I had a client once who I had to cancel because of snow, and she ripped my head off when I called her, and I said, I'm sorry, Mrs. So-and-so, we're not going to be able to come and clean your house today because, unfortunately, due to snow, which is not safe travel conditions. And she was, well, I'm a nurse, and I'm expected to get to work, and I don't understand why you can't get there. I had no problem getting to work. And there's a couple different issues there, one of which is sort of the risk-reward ratio. If you're a nurse, it's really important to get to work because people's lives are on the line. If you're a cleaning service, not nearly as important. The second factor that you need to take into account, and what I explain to my people, is the legal liability. Once people leave your office and are driving from house to house and then back to your office, you can be held legally responsible if they get into an accident. And I normally explain that to my clients and say, sort of nicely as I can, that Mrs. So-and-so, I understand, but if you're on your way into work and you get into an accident, your boss can't be held liable in any way. If my people are on the way to your house and get in an accident, I can be held liable. So in these type of conditions, we have to be safe and just shut down. Now, what I recommend is you set a clear line as possible. What we do here is, our rule is we match the school closing decisions. So if your home school district is canceled, we won't count it against you if you don't come in. However, if you are comfortable and it's not a level 3, you may come in. So just to give you an idea what this would look like, it varies a little bit. I have some people that live 10, 20 miles away from the office. So while it may be perfectly fine here in Lebanon, Ohio, out in Blanchester, which is a more rural area, and also a little bit further north, there's a pretty good chance that they may have to shut down due to a snow delay, the school districts. Now, the second part of that is, my rule is I only make people come in if they're comfortable. And the reason for that is, I can't give you guys legal advice, but I can tell you the legal advice I was given. I talked to my lawyer and explained to him my conundrum. And, you know, what am I going to do on snow delays if I make someone come in and they get in an accident? And his advice to me is, if one of your people tells you, especially by something like text in writing, that they are uncomfortable driving in the current weather conditions due to snow, ice, bald tires, or they're just not very good at driving in the snow, that you should probably let them off. Because while it doesn't legally increase my liability, if you've ever been to a jury trial, it's largely about storytelling. And if she's got proof that she told her boss that she shouldn't be out in the snow and you made her go anyway, legal liability aside, it's not a very good story. So he basically said, if they're telling you that they can't drive in the snow, that for all sorts of legal liability reasons, his recommendation was that we don't make them come in. On the flip side, I've got several employees from Canada, and they think it's humorously laughable that Cincinnati shuts down when we go get a quarter-inch of snow. They're perfectly comfortable in driving in snow. They've got vehicles designed for snow. One of them even throws chains on her tires. It's like, no big deal, it's snow. You know, if we shut down every time it snowed in Canada, we would never get anything done. So my rule is, if your school district is closed, you do not need to come in, and it won't count against you. Now, you also need to think about your policy on makeup days. A lot of companies require that if they're closed for a snow day, it is mandatory that people work on the following Saturday to make up any clients that had to be rescheduled, and that's written right into their policy. I also highly recommend that you communicate your policy up front with your clients when they start service, and also just remind them each year as we're going into snow season. One of the problems we tend to have is, once again, my employees come from some more rural areas like Blanchester, and my clients tend to live in some more affluent areas. Well, it's probably not a big surprise to you that Blue Ash, Ohio, which is one of the higher-end parts of town, does a pretty good job of plowing the roads and putting salt down. So it's not always uncommon that I'll be calling a client and saying, I am sorry, Mrs. So-and-so, I cannot come clean your house today due to snow. And she'll look out her window and say, my road's perfectly clear. And you go, well, yes, your road may be perfectly clear, but your cleaner, Sarah, is coming from Blanchester, and I saw a picture of what it looks like outside her house, and they haven't mowed or done anything about the snow yet. So communicate up front with the clients that basically what's going to happen if there's a snow day, how you're going to make it up, and how you're going to reschedule it. Also think about your strategy. You guys may not know it, but I used to own a doggy daycare once upon a time, and there was one day when we had a level 3 snow emergency, and I was at home. And I had 70 dogs at a building, and I couldn't figure out how I was going to get into that office. So basically, I'm a little extreme. I'm not recommending you guys all have to do this, But whenever the weatherman's predicting snow around here, I actually spend the night in the office so that if there needs to be reschedules and stuff, I can be on the phone in the morning rescheduling things. Now, you don't necessarily have to spend the night at the office. Your solution could be that you print out your route sheets the night before and you have them in your house so you can do those calls to clients if you need to reschedule anything. But the punchline being, think about what happens if you wake up in the morning and you can't get to work. Who's going to call the clients? Who's going to do the rescheduling? And how is that going to be done? And then the last thing you need to take into account, and I know I've hit a lot of people particularly hard this last year, is lost revenue. My experience is when I call a customer and need to skip due to a snow day, even if I have a policy where my cleaners are ready, willing, and able to clean for them on Saturday, typically about half of them will say, just skip. My kids are home anyways. They're making a mess. It's not that big a deal. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Well, that's great for them, but I just lost revenue, and I have overhead expenses to cover. So I typically go into winter with a pretty good cash hoard because if I have 2 or 3 unexpected days of lost revenue, it can really hurt me. And particularly, it can be painful if you pay on a week delay. So, for example, I pay on a 1-week delay, and what that means is this week when it snowed and I only worked 2 days, I'm actually paying for the hours you worked last week when you worked 5 days. So I'm trying to pay for 5 days worth of work with 2 days worth of revenue. And that can be really painful if you understand what I'm saying on that. So that covers the 2 basic types of somewhat emergencies, the first one being what happens if you have a localized service failure, meaning the phone lines go out at your business, and then we talk about the temporary closure as it relates to weather. And we're going to get to some more details at the end. I just kind of want you guys to think through the possible issues that can happen because people don't always think through all of the possibilities. So, Cece, we have any questions so far?
I don't. Please don't hesitate to use the chat feature to send in questions as they arise.
Well, we'll just keep moving on then. The next type of thing I want you to think about is your localized disaster. And localized disaster, of course, can mean things like a fire or a building collapse, but I also want you to think about theft. ISE does some coaching, and one of our coaching clients had their office broken into this year and had all of their electronics stolen. Now, they were diligently backing up on a Western Digital external hard drive every single day. So all of their client data was being saved on this hard drive in their office every day. But the problem was the thieves that came in stole the hard drive too. So they were doing a backup on a device in their office. All of their computers got stolen and their hard drive backup got stolen. So that put them in a little bit of a bad situation because not only did they no longer have the client contact information, but there was also things like client credit card numbers on those computers. And once again, that's where you need to think through the possible scenarios that can happen. In addition, in 2012, there are 2 separate cleaning businesses that I know of personally and have had conversations with the owners that had their offices burned down, lost all of their records, all of their cleaning supplies, all of their equipment. So situation 1, they lost all of their information, but they still had an office, they still had cleaning supplies. Situation 2, it was all gone. Now, there's some differences between the 2 that I want you to think through, because normally your insurance doesn't cover theft, or even if it does financially cover a theft situation, it typically only covers the cost of the equipment, and that's not really going to help you with the fact that you've lost all of your client data. Situation 2 is a little more severe in that your business burned down and everything is gone, but on the flip side, if you have insurance, you may be getting a payout to help you survive this situation. And typically your clients are a little more understanding when they find out that your business burned down versus what happens if someone breaks into your business and steals their stuff. So in each of these situations, I also need you to put on your client hat and imagine if you were the client and you got the phone call that said, I am so sorry, Mrs. Smith, you know, the donut shop next door caught fire and it spread to my office, which is what happened in one of the situations. It wasn't even her fault. The donut shop next door had a grease fire. The grease fire spread and took out her business. And also think about making the phone call of, hi, Mrs. Smith, this is Derek with my maid service. I wanted to let you know that my office was broken into and all of my client files and keys were stolen. You need to think through those situations, particularly that robbery one. You want to know what you're going to do with that ahead of time. So the good news versus some other situations we're going to talk about is you still have some clients and you still have people who want to be serviced. The bad news is nothing happened to them, so they may or may not be very understanding, and especially in the case of theft, there are some liability issues you're going to need to think about. You've got client keys out there and potentially credit card numbers. Are the credit card numbers on your system secured? Are they encrypted? How are they stored? Client keys, where were they kept? Were they in any way tied to client home numbers or such that people could tie the two together? For example, here at my main service, we've got a box where we keep client keys, and then we've got files, of course, on our customers. But the two never meet in any type of logical way. There's an ID code kept on each key, which is a combination of letters and numbers that would only make sense to the 5 or 6 people who work here. So if a key ever got taken by somebody, it would say PX4237. So PX4237 doesn't mean anything. It doesn't explain to you that that key matches Mrs. Smith's house. Good if it gets lost in the field, but also good if somebody breaks into my office. Now, I happen to know that that's a combination of their street name, their last name, and their service CEO customer ID number, but there's no way someone breaking into my business would ever figure that out. So those are the things you have to think through, and also whatever you're doing to potentially make it impossible to happen. And then regardless on how difficult you make it for somebody to match keys to homes, chances are your clients are still going to want to get their keys, their homes rekeyed, and you're going to need to think through that process and procedure. Hopefully it never happened, but think about it. Now, area-wide disasters are an entire thing differently. This is, of course, your earthquakes, your tsunamis, your tornadoes, and your hurricanes. More than 43% of businesses that get affected by a major natural disaster never reopen. And 29% of the businesses that do open close down in another 2 years after that. And at first, when I first saw this, I was like, man, that does not make sense to me. You know, I mean, I get why you'd have to close down, but why would you never reopen again? Why is it like 60% of the businesses never reopen? Well, one of the things I mentioned earlier is that I am the editor-in-chief of Clean Business Today, and one of our stories is called Success Stories. And we do profiles on some successful cleaning business owners. And this month we're doing a profile on a gentleman named Ron Holt who owns a company called Two Maids and a Mop. And this guy is like my personal hero, even though I've never met him. I've followed his business for years. He's not franchised, it's just him, he's independent, and he has 12 offices in 5 states. This guy is a serious operator. I mean, think about it, 12 offices in 5 states. That's fantastic. Most of us are just trying to figure out how to run one office. In my case, I think I'm hot stuff because I got 2. This guy has 12 offices. Well, I was reading his story, and I got to this part right here, where he talks about, right about here where it starts. And he basically says in 2004, he figured this thing out. His business was taking off, and he had 3 locations. So once again, 2004, the guy already has 3 locations. And then what happened in 2004, in a period of 12 months, they basically got hit by 3 major hurricanes. The hurricanes literally crushed the local economy and devastated the business and clients' homes. They took a huge financial hit, and that party they were having in 2004 seemed like it was a million years away. And this is a really key line. He lost more than 75% of his clients, or 75% of his employees, and 80% of his clients in 2004. In 1 year, he lost 80% of his clients. And at first, when you think about it, you're like, how on earth does that happen? But when a hurricane hits town and everyone's wiped out, some people are moving away permanently. Other people have lost their job. A lot of people just are reprioritizing money. I'm trying to get the house rebuilt. My last concern right now is hiring a cleaning service. I've got a tarp on the roof. And it took them, I think somewhere else in here, he said 3 years to go back to the previous level. So sit down and imagine if you're in an area, and we're all in an area where this can happen. Tornadoes hit Cincinnati, in fact, not just Cincinnati, but Blue Ash, one of the areas I service, just 5 years ago. So imagine what would happen if you lost 80% of your clients overnight, and it took you 3 years to get them back, and there was nothing you could do about it. Could you survive that financial hit? And in his case, he says it was a blessing in disguise because it taught them to be a lot more conservative, to not borrow money, to not get too crazy about expansion. And also, in his case, he made the decision that the next couple offices were not going to be in Florida because he had a little too much exposure to hurricanes. So he started moving inland and opening some offices inland. But think about that in those type of situations that could happen to you. So remember, the entire area is going to be affected, and as a result, even if you're lucky and your office doesn't get hit, there's a good chance your clients may or may not be gone. There's also going to be massive demand for things like repair services, which are going to drive up costs and delays and make everything more expensive, and normally the priority is to get residences up and running first. So if you're a business and you're asking to get some repair done to open your business back up, normally you're going to be done last, because normally the first priority is to get people back into their homes and only then swing back to the business space. So realize that if this does happen, don't think you're going to be up and running quickly. You need to think through some situations on it. So, any questions so far? Because I was about to switch into the so what can I do? You've scared the pants off of me. I still don't see any, Cece.
No questions coming through on my end either.
I must be really good today, guys, because you're letting me fly through this. Normally I get a lot more questions. So, what can you do about it? Well, the first thing is plan ahead. Basically, you need to sit down and play a big what-if game and think out all sorts of different scenarios. What would happen if I lost my phone and internet through no fault of my own in my business tomorrow and it took them 4 days to bring it back up? What would happen if I lost both? What would happen if there was a physical breach in security and someone broke into my office? First of all, what am I doing to avoid a problem with security? Do I have an alarm system? Do I have good locks? Am I in a good neighborhood? And secondly, when it happens, what are you going to do to make it so that if they're in the building, they're not finding the keys? Do you have a big, huge box that says keys on it that's easy to find? Or is it like mine where it's hidden in the closet in a sort of difficult place to find where they need to know what they were doing? And then if they did get the keys, they wouldn't know what to do with them once they got them. You need to think about what happens if you lose your facility. What happens if your building's gone? And then finally, what happens if you lose or your community gets hit? And realize in some circumstances, like the hurricane, all 4 of these things are going to happen. You're going to lose phone, you're going to lose power, you may or may not have a looting problem, you're going to lose your facility, and your community is going to be hit. So think through sort of each of those 4 cases I gave you and do some what-if scenarios on each. Second step is assess the possible business impacts on each. And don't forget about cash flow impact. I find a lot of people don't plan enough for a really bad winter. If you don't have enough cash on hand and you lose 8-9 days for winter, that can affect certain businesses. And a lot of really good businesses I know have gone out of business, not because they weren't a good business, but because they didn't have enough cash to make payroll. It only takes 1 week when you can't pay your people to all of a sudden discover you don't have any cleaners anymore. So plan for that. Do you have a line of credit? Do you have enough cash on hand? So think of the business impacts of each, but please, please, please don't forget the impact of that a short-term hit can make on your cash. A lot of people I know run their business with $1,000 in the bank and no backup plan, and it doesn't take a lot of snow days to make that fall apart. Conduct a risk assessment and then prioritize. So what I mean by risk assessment is you do need to do a little bit of what-if scenarios. For example, while it is possible Cincinnati, Ohio is going to be hit with a tornado, it's a relatively low likelihood, and so is a hurricane. So if I had to prioritize, I should probably spend more time on things like physical security, fire, and a service outage. And then I'm not saying never to get back to tornadoes, but we only have so much time in our day, so I would recommend that you do a risk assessment and then prioritize from top to bottom. And then put some plans in place to minimize the impacts of each. Once again, if your phone lines are down, what would your people do? Do your people know where to go? If the main office line is down, do they have your cell phone number? I know a lot of business owners don't give out their cell phone numbers to their employees because they don't want them to have it. Well, that's fine, but do they have somebody's number? Okay. Next consideration, I've already hit on this a couple times, but one of the major considerations is cash flow. And I know I keep coming to that, but they always say cash is king. You need to think about both the short and long-term need for cash. A couple-day shutdown of your business I've seen put people out of business. 3 days of snow can put you out of business if you don't have cash in hand and you can't pay your people. You also need to consider longer-term shutdowns. If you do have a disaster like your building burning down, it may be a week, 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks before you're up and running again, much less a hurricane, in which case it could be months. You might want to consider something called business interruption insurance, especially if you live in a high-risk area. There is a type of insurance that you can buy that if your business is shut down due to no fault of your own, they'll make up the missing income. And don't count on the federal government to do this because often they don't. They did in the case of BP when there was a big oil spill, but most hurricanes and tornadoes and stuff, the only thing that is offered to business owners is a loan, a low-interest loan to help them get over the period of time, which is, I guess better than nothing, but a low-interest loan is still debt. I still have to pay it back. So consider business interruption insurance, which will help cover you if your business shuts down. You need to think about your physical and data security. And physical security, once again, means things like the locks on your building, your alarm systems, where you're keeping things. Are your keys in the client's, I've gone to several businesses where they've got these pouches with the job order and then the keys in the pouch with the job order. Well, that's great. It's convenient for your cleaners, but what happens if somebody breaks into your business and goes to your file cabinet? You've basically given them the name, address, phone numbers, and keys for every one of your clients. I think it's best practice to keep the keys away from the client information, because if your physical facility is compromised, it's much more difficult for the two to be tied together. And don't forget about data security. Your credit card numbers should be in some form of encryption. If you don't know whether or not the software you do have does that, you should probably talk to them. Now, most people do use applications where it is encrypted and hidden. And the way you can normally tell this is after you put a credit card in, if it only shows you like the first few digits or the last few digits, it's probably been encrypted. But if you can open your application, like I know Service CEO used to not be encrypted, and if I went and opened Service CEO right now, I could see the full 16-digit credit card number. That means if someone stole your computer, they would get all of your client's credit card data. So ask some questions about that, because that could obviously cause some pretty serious effects for you. Also, what would it take for you to open quickly if you lost everything? I want you to think through details like what do you need and how quickly could you acquire it? Once again, go back to that fire scenario. Nothing's happened to the community, but your building is gone and everything in it. Where would your people go? Do they know where to go? How would you communicate with them? What do you need to reopen, and where are you going to get it from, and whose responsibility is it to buy it? If you've got multiple people in your office, you can divide and conquer this and get up and running quicker. Do they have authorization? Do they have a way to do this? Where were the funds going to come from? Do you have some cash on hand, credit cards? You know, you got to think through what would happen. And then who's authorized to help you, as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, to help this get going a little bit quicker. You don't want to try to do it all yourself. It'll take too long. All right. Okay, more considerations. You need to think about your employee safety and preparation. And what I mean by that is disasters don't always hit at home, especially things like tornadoes and earthquakes. There's a decent chance that something could happen at the business place. So what would happen if you were to actually have a disaster while at work? Do you have a first aid kit? Do you have an evacuation plan? Do you have batteries? You need to think through that as well and realize that disasters don't always happen outside business hours. What would happen if a disaster hit while your people were out cleaning houses? Fortunately, I'm not in an earthquake zone, but I used to live in San Francisco, and if I had 22 techs out in 22 houses and an earthquake hit, to be honest, I'm not sure how I would handle that, but I probably should start thinking about it, because there's a decent chance if I stay open long enough, it's eventually going to happen. Staffing contingencies. If something like this would happen, who would keep working for you? Who's critical staff that would have to keep working? If you've got some key people that if they don't come into work, you would have to shut down, you probably need to let them know that and say, hey, Beth, you are my office manager. If something happened, I need you to be in the office. You are the person that I'm counting on to keep the ship running. You should probably have that conversation with them up front, not after it happened. And then workplace contingencies. Where would you work from if it was a local disaster? And what I mean by local disaster is what happens if your building burns down. I mentioned my service loss problem where I lost phone and internet, and my solution is I packed up my computers in my car, drove home, and hooked up a little network in my house and ran the business out of my house for a couple days. But what would happen if this was a localized disaster where the entire area was taken down? What would I do then? Would I have a survival plan? Would there be something I could do to recover in that circumstance? Now, in my case, I've got a brother in Dallas, and he has some backup files, and he may be able to at least attempt to communicate with my clients and my techs on my behalf. Do you have someone like that that could help you out if you had an area-wide disaster? There are some best practices that you're going to want to look at. In general, you want to do everything you can to minimize paper files. Paper files are difficult to back up. You have to photocopy them. They're big. They're bulky. You have to keep them in multiple locations. And once again, if you get hit with an area-wide disaster, having paper copies at your house and paper copies at your business isn't going to do you any good if they both flood. So try to reduce paper to a minimum whenever possible, because it's easier to have electronic backups. If you do have an electronic backup, highly recommend that you do some of the online services. There's a lot of them that operate under a lot of different names, and I'm not going to really endorse one over the other. But they're great because what will happen is every night at 2 a.m. you will back up all of your stuff online, and if you have a failure locally, you can come and load it on another computer. If one of your servers breaks, you can download it. And unlike my client who recently was burglarized and had all their computers stolen, they cannot physically be taken out of your office. Now, the one thing to warn you about this is you need to make sure that it keeps working. I know a lot of people that have set up these online backup systems and just ignored it, and then when the disaster happened, they discovered that it stopped operating 3 and 4 months ago. Computers are a little bit quirky. For example, I mentioned at the beginning of this call that I had one of those Windows updates last night where I turned on my computer this morning. I had a new version of Internet Explorer. A lot of times when you have those automated Windows updates, Windows will automatically turn your firewall back on. And what that could mean, for example, is it would reset your firewall settings, and all of a sudden the online backup doesn't work anymore because your computer's blocking it. So if you do an online backup, you need to set up a business practice of once a week going to the online backup and making sure that there's a file dated yesterday, and if not, fix it, because an online backup doesn't do you any good if it doesn't actually back up. So don't pay a monthly fee and then discover that it stopped working 3 weeks ago because somebody unplugged a cord they weren't supposed to have unplugged. I also highly recommend security systems. A lot of people I know tend to think security systems are unnecessary expenses, but they're worth it. If you don't want to pay a monthly monitoring fee, there are a lot of services now, or not services, equipment that you can buy and have installed that will use either the internet or the phone to call cell phone numbers. And in my case, it actually calls my next door neighbor because my business is in a residential area as well as myself. So if somebody breaks into my office, I get a call on my cell phone, and the guy who lives next door to my office gets a call, which is convenient for me. There's some guy who actually lives next door, and I could throw a rock into his house. So he can kind of look over and tell me what's going on and whether or not I need to call the police. It's a cheap and effective way to do it, and I also cannot overemphasize enough, if you do have a security system, you should have something that makes noise, especially something that makes noise outside. In my earlier years, I wanted to work for the police department, and I actually used to work in college for what's called the crime deterrence unit, where we would go out and do surveys of homes. And one of the most important things is that there's some type of audible noise. If there's something outside that's making noise and making the neighbors turn on their lights and people turn and look, chances are whoever just broke down your front door is going to run away. A silent alarm doesn't do you a whole lot of good. So you want to have an alarm system that makes some noise, makes people notice, and makes people turn their heads. I mentioned this before, and I keep coming back to it, but try to have cash on hand in 2 weeks of operating expenses. And what I mean by 2 weeks of operating expenses is primarily payroll, but you've also got some other bills like pay. Ideally, you would have more than that, or at least have credit cards or something that would let you have access to it, but I highly recommend that you have access to 2 weeks of operating cash, or once again, 2-3 days of a really bad snowstorm could end up putting you out of business. You should price out business interruption insurance, especially if you're in a high-risk area. This can be expensive insurance, I'm not going to lie to you, but once again, if you're in an area where you could potentially have your business shut down for 3 or 4 weeks, you need to at least price the options and see what they cost. And then do what-if scenarios now, before the emergency happens, to think through things like what would happen if I lost 25% of my business, 50% of my business, 75% of my business. If you can't figure out a way to at least get break even in each of those scenarios, I would highly recommend you look at your overhead and try to figure out how to cut it back, because this business can fluctuate very radically on things like disasters. If you want to come out the other end of a disaster successfully, you need to have very low overhead expenses and very high variable expenses. And what I mean by variable is every time you generate $1 of revenue, you generate so many cents of expense. Overhead expenses are just things that you pay every month. So you need to have a plan, and if you sit down and you can't figure out how you would survive, cut your overhead. And not only is this good for you as a business to avoid those disasters, you're going to discover that you're going to come out of the exercise being more profitable, and it means you'll make more money in the good years, and you'll be more likely to survive the bad. So sit down and do the exercise of saying, if I lost 25% of my clients next week and there was nothing I could do about it, what would I do to survive? And go all the way down to a 75% revenue drop. And I know that seems crazy and that would never ever happen to you. But once again, remember that story I showed you just a little while ago. 2 maids in a house operating not in 1, not 2, but 3 separate cities, which you would imagine would give him a little bit of diversification. Lost 80% of his client base overnight in 2004. So what would that do to your business? Could you have survived that, come out the other side still operating, and then come out stronger on the back end? Okay, that's the entire canned presentation. So at this point, Cece, you want to open it up for some questions?
Will do. Give me just a sec to get that done. And folks should be available to fire away.
Do you have any questions? I guess it's an easy topic.
Derek, I have not so much a question, but a comment.
Go ahead.
I think the hardest thing about this is making it a priority, because it just seems like something that's not going to happen. It's not something you have to worry about today. It keeps getting pushed off. I would guess that it's on everybody's list of things to do, but how do you make it a priority to just actually do the work?
Well, there's a couple different ways that I did it. The first of all is these are the things that keep me up at night. Early on, you don't have a lot to protect, but once you start having a little bit of success and you've got a couple $100,000 in revenue, your mindset, and at least my mindset, switches to what could happen to make me lose it. So I start thinking about all the things that could happen, like an employee gets in an accident and I'm found liable, my building burns down, and things like that. So don't think of it as just another to-do list item. Think of it as protecting all the hard work you've done to get where you are. You can lose it all if you don't think about it, and I know it may seem like it's a lot of work, but think of all the work you put in to build it to this point. The other thing is this exercise, as I mentioned at the end, doesn't only make sure that you can recover from a disaster, it also makes sure that you can recover if there's a snowstorm, if there is all these little things that could happen to your business. You know, my business lost phone and internet for 4 days because a tree fell down in my front yard. That could have caused a major service interruption for me and caused me to lose a lot of clients. So the first thing is realize this is a lot more likely to happen to you than you would imagine. Second thing is get that mindset of I'm protecting what I already have. I've invested a lot of time and money. And then the third thing is realize you're going to come out the back end of this with a stronger business. This exercise of figuring out what would happen if the worst happened is going to make you realize that some of the things that you thought were necessary expenses might not be so necessary after all. And maybe you don't need those things, and you could live without them.
Good advice.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I do have a couple of things in place, the way that you set it up, all the things that you mentioned. What I never thought about was testing my my cloud backup. I do have it with Staples, and they do a full backup of everything, and they do support for all the computers, and we have 5 stations that they monitor regularly. But I never thought about, testing the system to see if it's working or not at this point, because, yes, they're charging me a monthly fee for each computer, and they are supposed to be doing the backup every day, but I never thought that I needed to check that. Would I be checking it from another location, or should I just check it from here?
You could probably check it from your location. I don't know all the different services, but the one I use, I can log in, and it would say it shows your backup files, and it normally shows mine shows the last 7. So basically, when I log in, I just want to see backup files dated yesterday. It takes 10 seconds. You log in, and go, oh, there's a backup file from yesterday. But there's been multiple occasions where I've logged in, and there hasn't been a backup file for a week, and I'm like, uh-oh. And then you have to start poking around and figuring out what happened. Normally you call their tech support and say, oh, well, your firewall's blocking us. We got to go in and tweak some settings. So different services have different things. Some services do have something built in where they'll alert you. But once again, if one of your computers is off of the network for some reason, a LAN cable is unplugged or something, there's lots of physical things at your business that could go down. So just check it once a week and make sure everything looks like you expect it to.
Yeah, and that got me thinking, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run a test on what would happen if we really lost everything, and we had to operate from another location for everybody, meaning, you know, admin people right now. And I do have a phone tree. They don't call me, and my employees don't have my phone number because it'd be, you know, and that's just like you said, I don't want anyone to have my phone number. So my, you know, my operating manager has the ability of texting and coming up with a phone tree, and so everybody responds. Now, should I run a test with them included, or should I just
it's never a bad idea to test your system and make sure they actually know what to do. That's why they do drills in the military, because when something goes bad is when you don't want to realize that people weren't paying attention. You want to make it automatic when it happens. And, you know, there's a lot more things and drills and details we can get into, but you want to run, I call it running a little water through the pipes. You want to make sure all the plumbing works and everything's hooked up the way you thought it was in your head. And it doesn't hurt to remind people every year. I remind both my clients and my techs every October of our snow policies, so that when it does eventually happen, they all go, okay, I know what to do.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And like I said, I'm a little extreme. If they're predicting snow, I go and spend the night at my office, but that's because I had the horrible experience of a level 3 snow emergency with 70 dogs in a boarding facility and no one there, and me literally hiking through the snow to get there. It was not a pretty experience.
Yeah, what we do is we change the voicemail, because, you know, it's virtual, so everybody will be able to listen to the voicemail, and it gives what you mentioned, the possibility, the level 1, level 2, or level 3, and it says if schools are closing, we're still going to be open. Number 2, if the employees cannot come into work, probably we will cut operations in half that they can check with us. And we're so close to D.C. that, number 1, you know, if things close to Arlington, Alexandria, and everything, they get cleaned up immediately, most likely, unless it's just tremendous, like in 2006, I think it was. But other than that, normally it does happen in less than 48 hours that we can open. And then the other question was about the keys. I don't have them together. I have them separate. Instead of, you know, of course, no name codes. But you mentioned you have a very different system, or unique. You use the client's codes from Service CEO?
Yes, I use Service CEO, and in Service CEO, there's something called a customer ID number, which isn't really used much in Service CEO, except it's displayed on their customer file, and you can search for it in the advanced search feature, but it doesn't show up on job sheets or work orders or any pieces of paper, so you would have to be in the software and know what it is. But on top of that, we don't just use the customer number. We use 4 digits of the customer number, the first name of the customer, and the first name of the street, because those 3 things together, when you put them into the Service CEO search field, will tell me what customer it belongs to. So even if I got somebody who frequently somehow hacked into Service CEO, I don't even have the full customer ID number. And I'm a little paranoid about keys.
Okay, so you have the 4 digits for the
4 digits of the customer ID number, and in Service CEO, it's actually a 6-digit number. I have the first letter of their last name and the first letter of their street.
Oh, okay. Of the street, okay.
So, like I said, I'm a little paranoid. You could probably just use their 6-digit ID number, but I chose to make it even more.
No, we have it. We have the code. We have all the codes that mean, like MM, 11 means customer home. MM12 means under the mat, MM13, whatever. And then MM18 means the key, that we have a key. Right. And it also, there in the notes, it has like 1847. But it's hard because then we can't track them down. It's on the customer notes. We don't have them on the, it doesn't print out.
Well, like I said, what we do is in Service CEO, I'll see if I can even find it. Every customer is assigned a customer ID number, right there.
Yeah.
That's what we use. And it's also searchable, but it's only searchable on the more extended screen. And I can't even remember where it is, but one of these fields is customer number. There it is. So I can search it that way. So if the key shows up with 3370, I can backtrack who 3370 belongs to.
Oh, but
no one else can.
I know, but how about the last name of the street? I mean,
well, I can do that. I mean, I was showing you a simplified version, but what I can do in Service CEO is you can do multi-searches. So I put in that 3370, but I could also put in under location, I got to find this all, but under location I could put in the address. It's been a while since I've used this. I don't run my business day-to-day anymore, so sometimes when I get in the software I get a little clunky because I'm out of practice. So there's that.
Okay, so what you're saying is you put the 4 digits and then the last name, let's say it's G and
right,
R.
I don't know how the example I managed to pull up as a business, but yeah.
Okay, so on the actual tag of the key, it only appears GR and the number, right?
Right. Yep, basically.
Oh, okay. Okay, interesting.
So any other questions so far?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Anyone else have anything so far?
Jared, this is Jane. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. Never thought of it because I've been growing and growing and growing and just hustling to grow, but yesterday my whole life just flashed before my eyes as far as almost a really bad accident. Luckily it didn't happen, but did not sleep all last night because I know that I was inches away from something really bad. So I have no plan in place. And I've missed half the phone call, so I don't know if you guys talked about it, but it's something that I really want to start thinking about as far as I have no plan in place in case something happens to me because I'm the only one in the business. And clients, employees, they wouldn't know where to go, what to do.
No, you're right. I mean, we've never really covered that as a topic, and it is another form of disaster planning. What would happen if something happens to you, and part of that is succession planning? Where would your business go? Who would be responsible for it? My wife wants nothing to do with the business, so she'd probably turn the keys over to my manager and tell her, good luck. But that's a good topic. I mean, maybe something we'd want to blow out in the future.
Yeah.
Because it's a combination of disaster planning, what happens, but also succession planning. Who's responsible? Who would keep the business running? Who's going to take over the business? Who do you want it to go to? So.
Right, and at every stage of business, there's no one to train.
So next time I have this, I've got a 5th stage. So I'm not ready for that one, but it's a good one. I think I'll have to add that and maybe swing back and do something in the future on it. But one of the key questions is who would you want to take over your business, and then who, if anyone, could bridge the time before they could. So. And that gets into systems and processes and having things documented so the poor person who gets to take over your business overnight knows what to do with it. Any other questions so far before we sort of wrap up? Okay. Well, hopefully we at least gave you guys some stuff to think about. And once again, go back and do some what-if scenarios. Some of us on this call have been to archery events and can tell you we've met people who've actually had this stuff happen to them. As we mentioned, one of the coaching clients that I work with actually had their business broken into and all their electronic stuff stolen. It's a lot more likely to happen than you would imagine. Also, we do continue to do these webinars the first Wednesday of every month. In June, we're doing surveying tools. We're going to do both Customer Thermometer and Survey Monkey because these operate differently, and there's actually a business case where you could potentially want to use both of these. And we're going to be talking about both how to collect feedback from your clients as to how the cleanings went, but also a little bit more broad topic. You guys may know that I highly recommend profiling your customers and understanding things like where do they shop, what are the stresses in their lives, and things like that. And one of these tools will help you with that. So we're going to cover that topic in June, and this is part of our Tools of the Trade series where we're just kind of talking about some of our favorite software applications. And as always, well, wrong one. It should be mail at ISC today, but that one will work too. If you have any questions, you can contact CC. Any other questions before we wrap up? We don't have huge attendance on this call because I think it's one of those things that a lot of people don't think about, so I congratulate all of you for being on this call. Just to give you an idea, going back to what I mentioned earlier, when I had the webinar on Home Advisor, we had 100 people on that call. So when I was talking about how to grow your business, everyone wanted to be on that call. But now that I'm talking about how to protect the business you just invested the last 10 years of your life in, I think we've got about 10 people. So I think you guys need to give yourself credit for the fact that you're actually thinking it through and doing that practice of thinking in your mind of what would happen and how do I protect this thing I spent all these years building, because it can go away a lot quicker and easier than you would imagine. Well, thanks for being on today, and if you guys have any questions, just send us an email.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Derek.